It is spring in the year 1220. On the edge of a burning village, a mother stands frozen, watching as soldiers drag her young daughter away. The girl is only 14, her wrists tied, her eyes empty of tears. To anyone else, this might look like the usual brutality of war, one more tragedy in a world of conquest. But it is not what you think, because behind the Mongol victories and legends lies a plan so dark that it turned motherhood itself into a weapon. What was happening to girls like her was not a random act of cruelty. It was a system, carefully designed, recorded, and repeated. A system that would change not just families or cities, but generations. If this story isn't told, we never understand the real cost of conquest. Genghis Khan did not only burn kingdoms or crush rulers. He reached into homes, into wombs, into the bloodlines of nations. His empire rose from fire, but it bred its future in silence. What began as war became something far greater, a campaign that reshaped humanity itself. The story of these women is not only a part of history, it is the shadow that still walks beside us today. Before he was known as Genghis Khan, he was a poor boy named Temujin, born among the harsh grasslands of Mongolia. His tribe was weak, his family often hungry, and his world was ruled by betrayal and fear. When he was only 9 years old, his father was poisoned by rival clans. Soon after, his mother and her children were abandoned, left to starve on the cold steppes. They dug roots from the ground, caught fish with their bare hands, and chewed bark just to survive. From those long years of hunger and loss, a hard truth grew inside him, that mercy was a luxury and survival belonged only to those who took what they needed. At 16, fate struck again. His young bride, Berta, was kidnapped by another tribe. For months, he searched through the empty plains, chasing rumors and whispers. When he finally found her, she was no longer the same. She was pregnant, and no one knew whose child she carried. To most, it would have been heartbreak. To Temujin, it was revelation. He saw how power could shape not only people, but generations. He began to believe that women were not just victims of war. They were the keepers of bloodlines, the vessels of the future. Whoever controlled them controlled what came next. From that moment, his view of conquest changed forever. Every tribe he would later defeat, every city he would burn, began with this one idea, that domination was not complete until it reached the womb. By the year 1209, the Mongols were no longer a scattered group of raiders. Under Temujin, now known as Genghis Khan, they had become a machine, disciplined, organized, and brutally efficient. Their first great test came during the campaign against the Tanguts, and with it, a new kind of conquest was born. When the Mongols invaded, they did not come as wild warriors alone. They came with scribes, officials, and physicians, each serving a precise purpose. Weeks before their armies arrived, spies quietly entered the Tangut cities to count, measure, and record. They wrote down the number of women, their ages, their family lines, and even their physical traits. Every detail was carefully listed, as if preparing for trade, not war. When the cities fell, the system unfolded. The men were executed or enslaved for labor. The women were divided into groups. Category 1, the young and fertile, ages 14 to 30. Category 2, those who had already borne children, valued for proven strength. Category 3, the elderly, the sick, and the very young. The first two groups were marked with ink on their wrists and sent into long caravans that followed the army. The rest simply vanished, erased from record. These were not ordinary prisoners. They were data logged and processed with chilling precision. For the first time in history, a government had turned reproduction into administration. Women became entries in a ledger, their bodies reduced to tools of expansion. The Mongols had transformed violence into policy, and the birth of an empire became a system built on the control of life itself. After the Tangut campaign, the system did not fade. It grew. When the Mongols moved on to the Jin Empire in 1211, the same machinery followed them. Only now it was larger, sharper, and more organized. What began as a brutal method of control became a cold routine. Each conquest repeated the same pattern: capture, classify, reassign. The women of every fallen city were counted, divided, and sent into the moving caravans that trailed behind the victorious armies. These were not chaotic scenes of war anymore. They were managed operations, designed with the precision of trade routes. Every caravan had its own record keepers, guards, and physicians. The process was the same from China to Central Asia. The men executed or enslaved, the women inspected, marked, and sent away. By the time Genghis Khan's armies reached the Khwarezmian Empire in 1219, the system had evolved into something far beyond conquest. The caravans stretched for miles, endless chains of women and children moving across deserts and mountains. Each stage had a purpose. First came selection, then control, then reproduction. The Mongols had discovered that they could expand their power not just by killing, but by breeding. Entire populations were absorbed into the empire without a single battle being fought afterward. Conquest had become logistics. Birth itself had become a weapon. Cities could rebuild their walls, but bloodlines once altered could never return to what they were. This was the true genius of Genghis Khan's empire, an empire built not only with swords and fire, but with the cold design of the human body. As the Mongol Empire expanded, its cruelty grew more calculated. Inside the caravans, physicians and officials began to study the women they had taken, not with compassion, but with the cold focus of scientists. They tested herbs that could increase fertility, forced diets that were believed to strengthen the womb, and performed crude operations to fix what they saw as unproductive bodies. Records were kept with terrifying precision. Each pregnancy was logged, each birth recorded, and each woman ranked by her success in producing children. The empire was no longer conquering only through war. It was conquering through biology. Reproduction had become state policy, and women's bodies were treated like tools in an endless experiment. But even in this darkness, quiet acts of defiance survived. Some women whispered warnings in code, a cough, a glance, a gesture that passed secret messages of escape. Others took control of their fate in silence, refusing food or finding ways to end pregnancies they never wanted. Some sang the songs of their homelands at night, keeping their culture alive when everything else was stripped away. A few carved their real names into their skin, so history would not forget them completely. The Mongols believed they could measure life by numbers and records, but they could never fully crush the will that refused to disappear. Even within the machinery of empire, there was still rebellion, small, hidden, and burning quietly beneath the surface. Centuries later, the world would still carry the marks of what Genghis Khan created. Modern genetic studies reveal that about 16 million men alive today are direct descendants of his male line. That is nearly 1 in every 200 men on Earth. His conquests were not only about battles and cities. They were about blood. He conquered not only lands but wombs. His empire was written not just in blood, but in DNA. What began as a policy of domination became a silent inheritance that still flows through families across Asia and beyond. The Mongol system turned violence into legacy. Each forced union, each stolen child, became a thread in a vast genetic web that tied the living to centuries of cruelty. For the Mongols, this was victory that never ended. Cities could fall, kingdoms could vanish, but children born from those dark acts would carry their conqueror's name long after the armies disappeared. What was once an empire of fire became an empire hidden inside the human body. And even now, every test tube, every DNA strand that traces back to him is a reminder that some victories never truly end. They echo, generation after generation, in the quiet code of life itself. And so, we return to where it began, to the mother who stood helpless as her daughter was taken away. Centuries have passed, empires have fallen, and even the name of that mother is long forgotten. Yet her pain still lives on, carried silently through time. Every genetic trace, every descendant born from those conquests, is a reminder of what she lost. The stones of the old cities have crumbled, but the echo of her cry still lingers in the blood of millions. Empires rise, conquer, and vanish into dust, but the suffering they cause does not disappear. It moves forward, generation after generation, reshaping lives in ways no history book can truly capture. The story of Genghis Khan is not just about victory or genius. It is about the mothers and daughters who paid the price for an empire's hunger. And though the world has changed, their silence still speaks, reminding us that even when power fades, pain remains, written quietly into the story of who we are. If you value stories that uncover the truths hidden behind glory, subscribe. It helps us bring forgotten voices back to light and remind the world of those who were never written into history. Every story we share keeps their memory alive, beyond the walls of textbooks and legends. Tell us, what part of this dark history shocked you the most? Was it the silence of the mothers, the cruelty of the system, or the fact that its shadow still lives on in our blood today? Your voice helps us rebuild what time tried to erase. So like, share, and subscribe, not just to learn history, but to remember humanity.